All right, what can we understand about the villains that are there, and how can we and what can we learn from Spider-Man's response to these different villains?
Okay, I know you guys have clicked this video just looking at the thumbnail. I'm pretty sure you're also just excited looking at the title Life Lessons We Can Learn from Spider-Man No Way Home. So we have Jacob with us, and he's gonna just exposit the whole thing for us, and he's gonna uh, give us the summary of the whole movie. Okay, so we're gonna summarize and discuss the theme of the movie. So there'll be spoilers revealed. So just be warned. Okay, so Jacob, it's over to you.
Okay. I didn't know that was going to be the title of the video. It's a catchy title. So, I mean, I would click it if I was seeing that. Just some disclaimers. I'm not a huge nerd of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. My wife really is. So I spoke to her quite a bit, getting into the intricacies of it before coming here. So my main purpose for engaging with what cinema and things in culture, whether it's music or books or current events, is not for the sake of it or what is particularly spoken about, but how can we as Christians engage with the world around us? Okay, if we are all made in the image of God, there are themes that are there in culture which are prominent, and culture reveals its themes in and through pop culture, through the movies, through the music, and through the things that are there in culture. So my main engagement with what particularly this movie is not to rate it or not to say how good it is or the plot line or the cinematic effects, but what are some larger themes that are there in this, and how can we grapple with it? How can we understand it deeply? What does it say about our time? What does it say about the nature of humanity, and how we can engage it from a biblical perspective? All right, so those are some caveats. With that, Lloyd, you wanted me to give us a short summary, right? So a very quick summary, and again, as Lloyd said, there are will be quite a lot of spoilers which will be revealed as we talk about it. So if you haven't watched the movie, then you need to look out for that. The plot line is basically this one: Spider-Man No Way Home takes off from Far From Home, where ultimately Mysterio reveals the true identity of Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and his face is displayed all over the news. Right, and so now Spider-Man's real identity as Peter Parker is revealed, and everybody knows him, and because of which he has a lot of problems, not just him, but the people around him, the people who he loves. All right, so in an immediate brainwave that he gets, he decides to go to Doctor Strange and somehow reverse back time or change something which can make people forget. Doctor Strange says that he does not have the time stone with him, but he can do something. He can put out a spell that can make people forget. But what happens is that spell botches because of what Spider-Man's interruption, Peter Parker's interruption here, that spell botches. And immediately what happens is, and here's the spoiler, it opens up the multiverse, and people from other universes, all right, people who knew Spider-Man as Peter Parker from other universes, come right into this particular universe. So that is, in a nutshell, the summary of it. And I guess the direction in which there are many things that you could talk about in the movie. The direction in which I want to take it is look into two particular aspects of it. One is the villains that are there. All right, what can we understand about the villains that are there, and how can we and what can we learn from Spider-Man's response to these different villains? And each of the anti-heroes that are there, they show something deep. They represent something deep, and it's very interesting if we were to look at it. If you look at Dr. Otto Octavius, you can look at him as basically technology controlling human beings. So he has his tentacles, he has his arm, all right, which he can actually possess and control, which he could before. But then what happens is that chip breaks, all right, and now those tentacles control him. And it's a very interesting metaphor for the way in which technology ultimately controls us. Things we use, tools that we use, which we use for our purposes, ultimately end up enslaving us, which makes us the villain in our own story that's there. Right? So I think the character of Dr. Otto Octavius represents that as a villain. How technology can ultimately control us and take over our bodies and take over our minds. Of course, you can very clearly see how that manifests itself in the technology that we use. Another villain that's there is the Green Goblin. And one of the things that the Green Goblin, which is there from the first Spider-Man, that's the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. I'm sure some images here can help you refresh that memory there. One of the things that that kind of villain represents is not knowing the limits of your own being. He took this serum thinking that he can get these superhuman powers, but what also accentuates is his dark sides. Even those gets highlighted. So there is certain powers that get highlighted, but also his temperament, and there's certain evil voices that are there in his mind also gets pushed, and which ultimately end up consuming him. So in one sense, he represents a person who does not know the limits of his being, who's always pushing towards greater and greater power, and that power can ultimately end up destroying us or changing us. It's a very, very deep symbolic image there. Quickly moving on, Electro. Electro is a person which is there in Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man. I'll just refer to it from the name of the Spider-Man who was there in that movie, Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. Electro, you see him initially as a person who's absolutely subjugated, powerless. People make fun of him. He has a bad complex about himself. He has an inferiority complex. And then suddenly when he gets that power, he uses it to the detriment of himself and society. And so him as a villain, what it represents is what happens to us when we do not form a healthy self-identity. When people around subjugate us or make fun of us and we let it affect us, then once we do get power or come to positions of power, we'll ultimately use that power to subjugate others. Right? And you see that, communism is in one sense an example of that. But you see that in society around. People who are subjugated ultimately end up, when they get power, subjugating others. So he has electricity and he uses that in a very detrimental way. Who are some other characters there? Lizard. All right, there are two more villains there. Sandman and the Lizard. Lizard again is from the Amazing Spider-Man, that is Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. It's one of the things that the Lizard, he's a scientist who takes a serum. He has he does not have an arm, but when he injects the lizard serum, he's able to grow artificial limbs. And he feels that being a reptile is the next evolution of human beings. And we should all move towards being more animal-like, which in one sense is almost like a de-evolution, but he feels like that is the progress. So in one sense, you can look at it as a distorted ideology, people who have a distorted ideology, a distorted view of the self, and what you would do when you have the power to push that on other human beings, what you would do. So I think Lizard in one sense shows that distorted ideology and a wrong understanding of human nature, a faulty understanding of who we are and how incredibly we are made, and trying to change our genetic system, not for anything higher, but in one sense for more animalistic instincts. And I think Sandman in one sense represents distorted love. He starts stealing things because of his daughter, because of his love for his daughter. And I think in one sense, what Sandman could represent is distorted love, where you think love is a great thing, but when love is distorted, you end up being like a villain. So my main point for saying all this is there are deep symbolisms here. And these deep symbolisms makes them the villain. And if we are able to reflect that on ourselves, we are able to see, what are the things that make us harmful to ourselves. And in one sense, these villains are representing that. These villains are heavily embodying that themselves. Now, what is the cure? for this. What is Spider-Man's response to it? Now, here's another huge spoiler there. When they open up the multiverse, the Spider-Mans from the other universes also, that's Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, also comes into Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And all three of them work together. And each of these villains correspond to each of these Spider-Mans. Now, what they show very beautifully here is that Peter Parker, when his Aunt May says that they need help, he refuses, even though it's an easier thing to just send them back into their universe. Tom Holland, that Peter Parker refuses to do that because he feels a moral responsibility to help them before he sends them out, which has a cost to him, which has a cost to his aunt. But in one sense, that's what makes him Spider-Man, a person who's able to accept that cost. And what you see here is the care and love of Spider-Man for the villains there is the healing antidote, is the one that ultimately rescues them and heals them. And each one, so Andrew Garfield makes a serum or tries to look at his two villains, which is Lizard and Electro. So those are the villains that he spots. So he knows them. So he focuses on them and he makes something. He makes a potion which can heal them. Tobey Maguire looks at his villain, that's Otto Octavius and Green Goblin. So he's looking at them in order to rescue them. So each one knows their villain and focuses in on that and is able to, through love and care and through the powers that they have, is able to change the situation, is able to save them. And I feel that has a lot of metaphorical significance for us. I think each one of us has one particular domain in our lives that we know and we are good at, and we have through our history understood. And maybe God wants us to focus in on those things. Maybe those are, it's not like world peace or something megalomaniac in that sense. But there is a way in which we can actualize our being into smaller realms that's there. And I think, in that way, Spider-Man can, as a hero, reveals those kind of things within us. I want to end with this, and then I'll open it to Lloyd for any type of question, Q&A on this particular thing. The line, the particular line, and it almost seems like a very cheesy line, but it's always very profound, right? With great powers comes great responsibilities. And in every single Spider-Man, that is what has been told to Peter Parker. With great powers come great responsibilities. The powers that you have is not something that you need to use for your own benefit or for your own selfishness. You could, and in one sense, all the villains are that, using power for their own benefit, and so you become an anti-hero in your life when you use the powers that you have without the responsibility that it entails. And how that applies for us is, if we believe that we are Christians and if we believe that we have the power of the resurrected Christ in us, that imbues us, that fills us with an immense amount of power which is there in God. A very countercultural power, a very different type, but an unbelievably powerful aspect of who God is bestowed on us. How do we want to use that power? And I guess one way in which we could reduce that is ultimately to say, it's there just to go to heaven. That's one aspect of it. But is there more to that? What is our responsibility to the world around us with the power that God has given us? If we are called the children of God, and if that is in who we are in Christ, is opening up that possibility of eternity within us, what does that mean? How do we manifest that in our time-space dimension that's there? And so I guess that's an important question which is there. And I think that's a beautiful aspect that Spider-Man within its theme reveals very clearly to us. So,
yeah. Thank you so much, Jacob. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, I really love the way you started it out, starting with the villains, and then you talked about the Spider-Mans and all of that. I mean, I really love the fact that the theme where he was trying to save the people who was trying to kill him, and that's something that I'm able to see even in the Gospels, where Jesus was trying to save the people, the Pharisees, the people who were around him, the Jews, and everyone were trying to kill him. So thank you so much, Jacob, for sharing that. So now I have some questions for you. I'm pretty sure a lot of people who are watching this video will have these questions. So I just thought I'll just represent them and ask these questions. So the first question that I have is, can you explain what this is about and what do you call this method? Because for a lot of us, this is something which is very new. So what do you call it and how will you define this whole thing?
You mean engaging with culture as
Yeah,
a whole?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I mean, yeah, there are many ways to term it. I mean, cultural apologetics is one way in which it is termed, and there's like an academic methodology behind it, But ultimately, see, I guess it is a Christian mandate. Christ is telling the Pharisees, you know how to interpret what the sun and the stars, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times. It's a scathing critique on the Jews and on the Pharisees of not being able to understand and interpret the culture that is there. It's also a biblical mandate, and you see Paul, wherever he's going, is trying to understand the world around him, understand the culture, and speak Christ into that particular culture that is there. So that's what it's called. It's you could call it any way that you want, but you could call it as a mission of what we are supposed to do and how we as Christians could engage with the world. But if there is a terminology, yeah, I guess it would be cultural apologetics.
I think even Paul did that in Acts 17, if you read. I mean,
Yeah.
can you just explain that? The whole thing where, Paul was trying to speak to the Greeks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's happening there? And can you just explain that?
Yeah. You're the altar to the unknown God passage, right? And see, what you also see in that passage is that he's also using the poetry that is there. He's using their language. He's using that in order to bring. Even if when you look at John 1 and you see the word logos there, that's a heavily culturally Hellenized Greek loaded word which is being used. So there are many passages like that, and that's not just in the New Testament, but also in the Old Testament. When we look at the creation accounts and you look at the other accounts that's there, you see what it is using the other creation accounts is. It is a polemic, it is going against so you have an Egyptian creation account which says that this God made a river, and this God made the ocean, and this God made this and that, and then the biblical writer is saying, no, there's one God spoke this world into existence, and he is dominant over everything. Now it's not flown particularly with the culture that is there, but it has been able to speak into the language of culture. I guess that would be something that we have to. How do we understand and speak into that language of culture that we see around us?
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Jacob. Yeah, the next question that I had was, why is there a need for this cultural apologetics in this digital age?
I think the need is very prominent and twofold. One is, how can we ourselves, it is Abraham Kuyper who says there is not a square inch that Christ does not claim to be mine. As Christians, we don't have any other alternative or option but to look into the world from the ideology that we believe in, from a biblical Christocentric framework. All right. So how do we look into the world that is there and then be able to, in our minds, be able to mesh what is the type of what life that the Bible projects itself, or what is the type of deeper theme that the Bible says, and what is the theme out there, and how do we connect it? How do we dialogue with these two? And so, in one sense, there is a mandate for us personally. The second mandate is also in terms of helping understanding our neighbor. The people that we live around are enmeshed in these cultural forms. It is Dostoevsky who says that first art influences life, then life influences art, then our life will get its very meaning from the arts. So the movies that we watch, songs we listen to are very powerful because the world will be shaped by them. There's a study which shows that in so many of the young democratic countries which came up in the 90s, the series Friends influenced their sexual ethic. So that was the biggest thing that influenced their sexual ethic at that point in time. So these things are powerful because it shapes us, it rewires us. The thing is, it will rewire us unconsciously. And I guess our mandate would be, how do we look at it consciously? I mean, it would rewire us subconsciously, but how do we consciously look into these themes, and then how do we speak into it? So there is a huge need for that, because the arts are always able to influence us very subtly, and if we are not aware of it, then we will get pulled into the tide. So.
True. Thank you so much, Jacob, for that. And like you said, cultural apologetics is, is a one way in which we as Christians try to reach the culture and use the culture, to share the gospel in the end. And while trying to do this, I hear this from a lot of my friends, so I just thought I'd just ask you this. While trying to reach out to the world, it seems as though Christians are becoming more like the world rather than the world becoming like Christians. We are just trying to be like the world and try to show as if we are part of the world. And so what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about that? On that?
I mean, I think that's a fair argument. I think the minute you step out into unknown territories and step out into, there's a huge chance of it affecting us. But the alternative to that is, then we all need to shut ourselves in some vacuum that is there, or be cut ourselves from the world and then form have nothing to do with it. And I don't think that's the life that Christ has called us to live. To be salt in the world is to be able to enmesh ourselves, to get into it, but then to change it from within, to be able to influence it from within, not to blind ourselves, not to cut ourselves and say, no, this is not what we want to do. Now, I agree that there are dangers to it. I agree that in engaging with these spaces, there's a huge possibility and there's a huge chance and almost like a guarantee that they would influence us and change it. And I feel like here is where the role of the Spirit and us as a Christian body and a Christian community, and how we are able to do it together as one body in Christ, all those factors come into play. And all these factors can reduce the amount of risk that is there. But in one sense, it is a risk that Christians have always been explorers in that sense, especially Protestant Christian, is to going into unknown land. So whether it is an unknown land in South America or South Africa, or whether it's an unknown land in the cultural space or the digital space, it is always to be explorers, to push ourselves into these unknown spaces and then be able to understand and redefine the space that's there. So that argument or that question is well taken, and those dangers are well pointed out. But the call is always the same, and it does not have to be for everyone. It's not a call that has to be with everyone. If somebody says, no, I don't want anything to do with anything about culture, and then be able to seclude themselves, that's a calling. That's what they feel. That's totally fine. But for others who feel that we need to be able to engage culture, we need to be able to provide frameworks for that. We need to be able to do it together and be able to do it well together.
True. That makes a lot of sense. What are some pushbacks that you get, brother? So, I'm pretty sure, you get a lot of pushbacks from people who are in the traditional churches, we are all in India, and, a lot of us are from traditional churches like CSI, CNI, and all of that. So, what are some pushbacks and challenges that you face even while you're trying to do this in India?
Yeah. See, the thing is, we'll get pushbacks. Anything that we do, they will always be counter perspectives, and those counter perspectives are necessary. We need to be able to listen to it. I guess one thing would be, what does movies have to do with the Bible? What is it's almost looked at as anti-Christian. Things that are there in the world is completely corrupted and negated, so it is a. I guess it is their very cautious fear. All right, that. And those dangers that you pointed. So those would be some of the pushbacks that is there. And I understand those pushbacks. In traditional churches, there's always a fear of it. I came from a church where looking at going to movies wasn't looked at as something good. But it's changing. And I think I've received a lot more support than pushbacks. I think people are finding the need for it or the necessity for it to engage, and whether we like it or not, uh, all of us are engaged in these cultural spaces. All of us are subscribed to Netflix, at least most of us within the urban areas, Amazon Prime. We are all on social media. We are all engaged with the world that's there. So I think we need to be able to look past the pushback and say this is our calling. This is where we need to be, and just and move ahead with it. But at the same time, taking all the caution that has been given, taking all the pushback that is given in due caution, in due reverence, in due thought, and then moving forward with it. But I feel personally, I feel it's an endeavor that we should be embarking on. And even this whole theology of the kingdom of God, that it is not about us escaping, not about us merely escaping the world. But when Christ prayed, your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven, is how do we bring that kingdom into the spaces that is there, into the world that is there? What is the Christian responsibility that's there? And engaging with culture is an important part of that Christian responsibility, to be able to go into these spaces and be able to look into it and then speak Christ into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything?
No. Any clarification? I don't know if that perfectly answers your question, but
right. Yeah, I think you covered most of it. So I have a follow-up question. Let's say I am interested in this whole cultural apologetics. So where do I start? And what are there any models or any format, or how do we start this?
That's a good question, and thanks. I think that's a good question to kind of put it into practicality. One way, and if I could do a plug-in, I do LFS does a channel called Culture Unraveled, where we try and look into different, like what we did today, look into Spider-Man and look into other things that are there in culture and be able to kind of bring out the deeper themes that is there. I think one way is to just start doing it, whenever, just in your mind, whenever you're watching something. So you watch Spider-Man 2. I'm sure there would have been some things that are going on in your mind, and as you're looking at some of the things. I know we had a call earlier, Lloyd, where you said about something that struck you particularly when you are watching it. And that is a way in which you engaged with the culture, with what you watch. And I think we all do it, but I guess there is a need to kind of articulate that, to speak about it more, to have conversation about it with friends and family and others around. And so one is to start doing it, but it's also, second is to kind of prepare us, right? There is an academic framework for it. Kevin Van Hooser is written a lot on the hermeneutics of reading culture. That is, how do we interpret meaning? And then he has for architecture, he has for theater, he has for art and painting, and then he has for movies, with different people contributing to it. But again, they are Western in its flavor. I think here we still need to develop a lot of those things. We need to be able to develop, even if an Indian watches a movie from the West, or a Marvel movie, the way in which we process it is different. And so there is an academic framework for it, but it's not. There are places that are developing it. So I guess one way to do it would be to form a community in your church, a group of people who are interested in it, and form a cohort of people, so you can put out those ideas that's there. And then, like the books that I suggested by Kevin Van Hooser, he's a helpful resource, evangelical, who's able to help. There's a podcast called Thinking Out Loud. It's by a person, two people in the US who I highly respect, Cameron McAllister and Nathan Rittenhouse. I listen to them quite a bit. The Gospel Coalition does quite a bit of work in this. So it is developed quite a bit in the West, and there are people doing it. I think those would be some things to just to refresh our mind. But mostly it's to just go ahead, start doing it. Get together, get with other people, other Christians who are kind of doing it, through ideas, like what we are doing now, through ideas that's there, and then be able to speak. I would say, like, one requirement would be to, sometimes we are very very quick to reduce everything to a very moralistic stance, and we speak from a very high moralistic stand onto it, and everything becomes purely a moral thing to hit against.
Right.
And I guess that is one danger that we need to pull out of. Of course, that needs to be there in the forefront of it, but that should not be the only thing that we are reading into culture. We need to be able to read the deeper themes of what is good that is there in culture that can be redeemed, and I think that is part of the Christian endeavor, to see the good that is there and to be able to bring that into the spotlight and be able to see how this connects biblically and be able to encourage that. So,
True. I think this is something that the Western people call it moralistic deism. I think that's something that we can easily fall into, and that's a warning that in the end of the day, we can't do this with our own strength. We have to go to the cross again and again to get the strength to obey this. And yeah, thank you so much, Jacob, for answering all these questions that we had. My last question will be, what are some tips or some warnings that you want to give to our friends, who want to, train themselves in this cultural apologetics world? So what are some things? I remember, you telling us about two things, doing this with a community of people. That's one thing. And are there anything else that you want to add?
I mean, definitely do it prayerfully, because you're entering into risky territory. You're entering into a space, and we shouldn't think too highly of our ability to withstand these kind of temptations. So, of course, do it prayerfully. Do it with the work of the Spirit. The Spirit has to be there in that process. That's there, and so. Yeah, do it prayerfully. The third one is, I think I've also mentioned, to read some of the literature, to read others who are kind of doing it. Fourth is to produce material in however way that you want, whether it is to write a blog about it, or do a video about it, or have conversations about it, to have certain outputs, to have channels of output where you're not just having it's not just in your mind or within your cognition, but being able to express it, to articulate it, and to become better articulators about it. And in that way, we are also bringing God's kingdom into these cultural spaces. There is a particular theological shift, because ultimately it is, in one sense, Christocentric. That's what we were talking about. If Christ is embodying the human experience for its entirety, it is to come into our space, to take us to where He is, take us to the kingdom. And the call of a Christian is to go into these spaces, however dangerous they might be. That is there. So there is a particular theological shift also, not a radical theological shift, but to move towards saying the Christian call is to bring the kingdom into this, is to speak into this, is to be salt and light into these spaces. That not everything that the world we live is beautiful. Art is beautiful, and it can be redeemed. That's there.
Wow. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this video. And if you are interested in this cultural apologetics and all of these things, you can check out our brother Jacob's channel, Culture Unravel, and we're gonna attach and put the description, put the link in the description below. You can just click and just check out his content. Hope that is a blessing for you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Do you feel unequipped to talk to your friends about Jesus? Do you want to know more about God and His Word? Are you struggling to kill sin? And do you want to pursue holiness in your life? Then this channel is for you.